the oldest ships in human history. From the earliest days of human civilization, long before the great empires rose and fell, and long before maps charted the shape of continents, humankind looked toward the vast, rolling waters with both fear and fascination. Rivers, lakes, and oceans were not only natural barriers, but also mysterious pathways, stretching endlessly toward horizons that promised unknown lands, resources, and possibilities. To cross these waters, humans needed more than courage, they needed ingenuity. And thus, the story of ships, the oldest ships in human history, began. The ship, in its most primitive form, was far more than just a tool of travel. It was a symbol of survival, of exploration, of power. To build a vessel capable of floating upon water required an understanding of balance, buoyancy, and craft. To guide it demanded cooperation, skill, and bravery. These early ships did not simply carry people, they carried entire cultures, economies, and destinies. They allowed humans to fish more effectively, to trade with neighbors, to wage war across rivers, and ultimately to connect civilizations that might otherwise have remained forever apart. In this story, we shall journey back through time, far beyond the familiar outlines of wooden sailing ships, galleons, or warships to discover the very first vessels created by human hands. From the dugout canoes of the Stone Age to the reed boats of Mesopotamia and Egypt, and from the river rafts of ancient China to the magnificent ceremonial ships of early kings, we will follow a timeline that stretches thousands of years into the past. By doing so, we will uncover not only the evolution of maritime technology, but also the way in which ships shaped the course of human history. Historical context: humanity before the ship. To truly appreciate the birth of ships, we must step into a world where the concept of sailing did not yet exist. Imagine a time roughly 8,000 to 10,000 years ago. Humanity was slowly transitioning from nomadic hunter-gatherer societies to settled agricultural communities. Rivers and lakes provided fresh water, fertile soil, and abundant fish. Yet, these same waterways were also obstacles, preventing travel or communication. Crossing a wide river was dangerous, and for many groups, impossible without ingenuity. It was in this environment that the first seeds of shipbuilding were sown. Archaeological evidence suggests that humans had been experimenting with buoyant objects for tens of thousands of years. Bundles of reeds, logs lashed together, or even animal skins stretched over wooden frames may have served as primitive floats. But at some point in prehistory, these crude experiments transformed into something far greater: the deliberate construction of watercraft. The oldest surviving boats discovered by archaeologists provide us with remarkable insight into this transformation. Among them is the Pesse canoe, found in the Netherlands and dated to around 8000 BCE, which is considered the world's oldest known boat. Carved from a single log of pine, it represents the dawn of true boat building, a moment when humans mastered not only the use of tools, but also the art of shaping nature to serve their ambitions. From this humble beginning, ships began to evolve in tandem with civilization. As societies grew more complex, so too did their watercraft. In Mesopotamia, reed boats navigated the Tigris and Euphrates rivers as early as 5000 BCE, carrying goods, people, and armies. In ancient Egypt, papyrus reed boats became symbols of both daily life and religious ritual, used not only for fishing and transport, but also for carrying the dead into the afterlife. By 3000 BCE, large wooden ships were already being constructed to sail along the Nile, laying the foundations for Egypt's naval dominance. Meanwhile, in other corners of the world, shipbuilding traditions developed independently. In the Indus Valley, merchants may have used simple boats to trade along rivers and coastlines. In China, bamboo rafts and early wooden vessels provided the means to traverse great waterways, such as the Yellow and Yangtze rivers. And in the Pacific, the ancestors of Polynesians would eventually perfect the art of the outrigger canoe, enabling daring voyages across vast stretches of open ocean. Each of these innovations was born from necessity. Without boats, humanity would have been confined to land, unable to fish beyond the shoreline, unable to explore distant territories, unable to connect across rivers and seas. Ships were not a luxury. They were a survival strategy and later a means of power. Project and construction, the birth of early watercraft. When we speak of the design of the earliest ships, it may sound strange to our modern ears. After all, these vessels were not drawn on parchment or calculated with geometry. Instead, their project was the sum of human observation, trial, and error. Early humans studied nature, the buoyancy of logs in rivers, the way reeds floated, the way hollow objects resisted sinking. Out of this simple observation came the earliest attempts at construction. The very first watercraft were not ships as we know them, but rather rafts. In many parts of the world, people lashed together bundles of wood, bamboo, or reeds to form a stable platform that could carry several individuals. These rafts were remarkably effective for fishing or short river crossings. They were cheap, quick to build, and easy to repair. However, they were not particularly fast, nor could they withstand rough waters. From rafts, humanity advanced to the dugout canoe. By hollowing out a single large tree trunk, early shipbuilders discovered that they could create a vessel that was not only more maneuverable than a raft, but also capable of carrying heavier loads. The earliest example we know of is the Pesek canoe, found in a peat bog in the Netherlands. This pine log, carved with simple stone tools, measured about 3 meters in length and 70 centimeters wide. Though primitive in appearance, it was functional, allowing its operator to paddle along lakes and rivers. As tools improved, so did construction methods. By the 4th millennium BCE, people had begun using fire and adzes to hollow out larger logs, creating canoes up to 10 meters long. These could transport multiple passengers, goods, and even animals. Such vessels were particularly important in forested regions where large trees were abundant. In areas where massive trees were scarce, such as Mesopotamia and Egypt, shipbuilders turned to another natural material, reeds. Papyrus and other reeds were cut, dried, and bundled tightly together to form boats that were both light and buoyant. The earliest Egyptian boats of this type were small, used for fishing and river travel. But over time, as societies grew wealthier and more powerful, these reed boats evolved into larger, more sophisticated craft capable of transporting heavy cargo. Some depictions from around 3000 BCE show reed boats with curved ends, a design that would become iconic in Egyptian art. One of the most remarkable discoveries in ship archaeology is the Khufu ship, also known as the solar boat, buried near the Great Pyramid of Giza and dating to around 2500 BCE. Although it was never meant to sail, its purpose was ritual, intended to carry the pharaoh's soul through the heavens. It nonetheless demonstrates the sophistication of early shipbuilding, measuring an astonishing 43 meters in length and built of cedar planks. It had no nails. Instead, its parts were lashed together with ropes. The fact that such a vessel could be constructed in the 3rd millennium BCE reveals just how advanced the Egyptians had become in their maritime technology. Technical features of early ships. The technical specifications of the world's first boats might seem modest compared to later galleons or steamships, but for their time they were revolutionary. Materials: wood, pine, oak, cedar, reeds, papyrus, bulrush, bamboo, animal hides. Length: smallest dugout canoes measured about 2 to 3 meters. Ceremonial Egyptian ships reached over 40 meters. Propulsion: paddles or simple poles for pushing along shallow rivers. In later millennia, sails of linen or woven reeds were introduced. Crew size: early rafts might hold only 1 to 3 individuals. Larger reed boats or wooden ships could carry 20 to 30 people. Cargo capacity. Reed boats on the Nile were capable of carrying large blocks of stone, grain harvests, and trade goods. The introduction of sails was a turning point. While it is difficult to pinpoint the exact date, evidence suggests that by around 3,500 to 3000 BCE, sails were being used in Mesopotamia and Egypt. These early sails were square and mounted on a single mast. With them, ships no longer depended entirely on human muscle. Wind became the new ally of exploration. The combination of wood, rope, and sail transformed boats from simple river vessels into the first true ships capable of long journeys, carrying soldiers, merchants, or emissaries across seas. This leap in design marked the beginning of humanity's mastery over not just rivers, but also oceans. Service and expeditions, journeys on the waters. Once humanity had mastered the construction of vessels that could reliably float and be directed across rivers, lakes, and even coastal waters. Ships quickly became more than mere tools of subsistence. They became vehicles of connection, of expansion, and of power. The service and expeditions of the earliest ships reveal how vital they were in shaping the course of civilization itself. River voyages and daily use. The most fundamental role of early ships was in the realm of daily life. Fishermen used dugout canoes to reach deeper waters, where the catch was richer than along the shoreline. Farmers used reed rafts and boats to transport grain, fruits, and animals across rivers to markets and settlements. Hunters used them to cross lakes and pursue waterfowl. In Mesopotamia, for instance, the Tigris and Euphrates rivers were lifelines for the region's city-states. Boats constructed of reeds or bitumen-coated wood transported clay, barley, dates, and wool. Without these vessels, the thriving urban centers of Ur, Uruk, and Babylon could never have flourished, for the rivers provided the only practical highways for bulk trade. In Egypt, the Nile became the great unifier of the kingdom. Every year, when the river flooded its banks and deposited fertile soil, ships were essential in carrying people and goods between far-flung communities. Farmers loaded their harvests onto cargo boats, while priests and officials traveled from temple to temple. Egyptian art depicts scenes of daily life on the Nile, small fishing skiffs, reed boats piled with goods, and ceremonial barges, carrying statues of gods during festivals. Expansion of trade. As ships became larger and sturdier, they ventured beyond rivers and into coastal waters. By 3000 BCE, there is evidence of regular maritime trade between Mesopotamia and the Indus Valley. Ships carried lapis lazuli, carnelian, beads, and timber, establishing one of the earliest known international trade networks. Similarly, the Egyptians sailed into the Red Sea, reaching the land they called a Punt, believed to be located near modern-day Somalia or Eritrea. Expeditions to Punt were legendary, bringing back incense, myrrh, ebony, ivory, and even live animals such as baboons and giraffes. These voyages were not minor undertakings. They required ships capable of sailing hundreds of miles along coasts and braving unpredictable winds and currents. The Mediterranean, too, became a cradle of maritime trade. The early Canaanites and, later, the Phoenicians developed ships that could carry timber, metals, and wine across the sea. Even before the famous Phoenician dominance, simple wooden vessels were already moving along coastlines, connecting Cyprus, Crete, and mainland Greece. This gradual weaving of maritime routes laid the foundation for the later flowering of trade networks that would dominate the ancient world. Military use of ships. Where trade went, conflict soon followed. Ships were not only used for peaceful exchange, but also for raiding and warfare. Coastal settlements became vulnerable to attack by sea, and so ships became weapons as well as lifelines. In Mesopotamia, records from Sumerian tablets suggest that reed boats were used to transport soldiers across rivers during campaigns. Although these early vessels were not warships in the later sense, Their role was crucial. Controlling the waterways meant controlling the lifeblood of the land. Egyptian history also records military expeditions conducted by ship. Pharaoh Snefru, who reigned around 2600 BCE, launched a naval campaign against the peoples of Lebanon to secure cedar wood for shipbuilding. His fleet brought back not only timber but also captives and spoils. This early example shows how ships had already become instruments of projection, extending power far beyond the borders of the Nile Valley. By the time of the New Kingdom, 1550 to 1070 BCE, Egyptian ships had grown large and sophisticated enough to transport entire armies. Reliefs from the temple of Medinet Habu depict the great naval battle of Pharaoh, Ramses III against the Sea Peoples, around 1177 BCE. These mysterious invaders swept through the eastern Mediterranean, and Egypt's defense relied heavily on its fleet. The depictions show oared ships with high prows and sterns, archers firing from the decks, and boarding actions that determined the fate of the kingdom. Exploratory voyages. While warfare and trade were pressing concerns, exploration also drove the use of ships. For many cultures, venturing into the unknown waters was an act of both necessity and courage. In Egypt, sailors navigated the Nile into Nubia and beyond, encountering peoples with whom they exchanged goods and ideas. In Mesopotamia, traders ventured along the Persian Gulf, connecting with Elam, Dilmun, modern Bahrain, and the Indus Valley civilization. These voyages required not only seamanship, but also knowledge of stars, winds, and currents, skills that were passed down through generations. In East Asia, the early Chinese were already developing bamboo rafts and boats capable of traversing rivers that stretched for hundreds of miles. These expeditions laid the groundwork for the later, grander voyages that would characterize Chinese naval history. And in the Pacific, long before written records, the ancestors of Polynesians were experimenting with double-hulled canoes and outriggers. Though this lies outside the traditional centers of ancient civilization, it remains one of humanity's most remarkable maritime achievements. The ability to cross vast oceans, guided only by the stars, the waves, and the flight of birds. Ships as bridges of civilization. What becomes clear is that ships were not mere tools, they were bridges. They connected one shore to another, one people to another. They carried goods, soldiers, ideas, and even gods. The myths of ancient cultures often feature boats as vehicles of the divine. In Egypt, the sun god Ra traveled across the sky in his solar bark. In Mesopotamia, the hero Utnapishtim built an enormous ship to survive the Great Flood. These stories echo the central role ships played in both the practical and spiritual lives of early humanity. Significant events, battles, catastrophes, and legends. The earliest ships were not built for glory. They were born out of necessity, to fish, to trade, to carry goods, and to cross waters that once seemed impassable. Yet, as human societies grew more complex, so too did the events that surrounded these vessels. From legendary battles to catastrophic sinkings, and from sacred journeys to myths that survived thousands of years, ships became central figures in the human story. The flood myths and the Ark tradition. One of the earliest legendary ships in human history is not found in archaeology, but in myth. Across numerous cultures, from Mesopotamia to India and beyond, stories of a great flood and a saving vessel appear again and again. In Mesopotamian tradition, the Epic of Gilgamesh recounts the tale of Utnapishtim, who built a massive ship to survive the god's flood. His vessel was cube-like, measuring 7 stories high, sealed with pitch and filled with animals and provisions. This story, dating back to the 2nd millennium BCE, predates but strongly resembles the biblical tale of Noah's Ark. These myths tell us something profound. Ships were already understood as life preservers, not merely for individuals, but for entire communities and even all of creation. They were seen as vessels of salvation, carrying life through chaos. That such stories appear in many regions suggests that early floods, perhaps caused by rising rivers or storms, were so destructive that only those with boats could hope to survive. Over time, these memories transformed into enduring legends. The Egyptian solar boats. Among the most striking symbolic uses of ships were the solar barks of ancient Egypt. These vessels were never meant to touch water. Instead, they were ritual objects, buried beside pharaohs so that their souls might sail across the heavens. The most famous example is the Khufu ship, buried beside the Great Pyramid of Giza around 2500 BCE. Although symbolic, its construction demonstrates real shipbuilding skill. 43 meters long, built from imported cedar and assembled without nails, using rope lashings. It was functional in every sense, capable of floating, yet its role was entirely spiritual. Its significance lies in how deeply ships had penetrated the human imagination. They were not just machines, but metaphors for life's journey, for death, and for eternity. Naval battles and the sea. Peoples. By the late Bronze Age, ships had become tools of warfare. The most famous example comes from the reign of Ramses III of Egypt, who faced the mysterious invaders known as the Sea Peoples around 1177 BCE. Reliefs at Medinet Habu depict a dramatic naval confrontation. Egyptian warships, propelled by rows of oars, face off against the intruders' vessels. Archers fire volleys from decks, while Marines engage in brutal hand-to-hand combat with boarding hooks and spears. This battle, carved into temple walls, is one of the earliest detailed depictions of naval warfare. It shows that by this time, ships were not only vehicles of trade, but also floating fortresses, capable of deciding the fate of entire kingdoms. Catastrophes on ancient waters. While legendary ships often speak of glory, the reality of early seafaring was fraught with danger. Rivers could flood, overturning rafts and reed boats. Sudden storms at sea could sink entire fleets. Many of these catastrophes are lost to history, but some survive in fragmentary records. In Mesopotamian texts, scribes describe storms destroying boats laden with grain or washing away trading expeditions. Egyptian records speak of ships dashed against rocks along the Red Sea coast. And archaeology itself reveals evidence. Sunken boats, waterlogged timbers, and broken reed bundles tell of journeys that ended in tragedy. For every successful expedition to Punt, there must have been others that never returned. For every flourishing trade voyage between Ur and Dilmun, some ship was likely lost beneath the waves of the Persian Gulf. These silent catastrophes remind us that early mariners ventured into waters with no maps, no compasses, and only the stars as their guide. Each journey was an act of courage, and each return a triumph. Legends that shaped civilization ships also became entwined with the legends of emerging civilizations. In Greek mythology, the ship Argo carried Jason and his band of heroes on their quest for the Golden Fleece. While this tale is younger than the oldest boats, it reflects how deeply the concept of the ship had taken root, as a vessel of adventure, destiny, and transformation. In Egypt, the daily journey of the sun, god Ra across the heavens in his solar boat, symbolized the eternal cycle of life and death. Each night, Ra's bark descended into the underworld, battling chaos only to rise again in the morning sky. Here, the ship was not just a tool, it was the axis of the cosmos itself. Even in the distant Pacific, where oral traditions preserve the memory of great voyages, ships became more than transportation. They were ancestors, gods, and living beings. Canoes were named, honored, and sometimes even buried. To board a canoe was to enter into a relationship with a sacred companion, one that carried human lives across the endless ocean. Cultural and historical legacy echoes across time. As centuries passed, the earliest ships gave way to ever more complex designs: triremes, galleys, galleons, and modern steel giants. Yet the legacy of those first reed boats, dugout canoes, and river rafts never truly disappeared. They became embedded in the collective memory of humanity, shaping not only technology but also culture, religion, and imagination. Ships in myth and religion. From the dawn of recorded history, ships were woven into sacred narratives. In Mesopotamia, Utnapishtim's ark became a symbol of survival and divine favor. In the Hebrew Bible, Noah's Ark echoed this theme, retelling the story for a new generation and embedding the ship into one of the most enduring religious texts on earth. In Egypt, the solar bark of Ra was not simply a religious image, it was a reflection of cosmic order itself. Each day, the sun god's journey across the sky mirrored the daily voyage of ships upon the Nile, reinforcing the connection between the heavens and human life. Even in cultures far removed from these centers, ships held sacred power. In Polynesia, canoes were not merely vehicles, they were family lineages, embodiments of ancestors, and vessels of destiny. To sail in them was to carry the spirit of one's people across the endless blue. Ships in art and memory. Archaeological discoveries reveal that ships were among the most frequently depicted objects in ancient art. Rock carvings from Scandinavia dating back to 2000 BCE show long boats etched into stone, their hulls lined with rows of oars. Egyptian tomb paintings depict papyrus boats laden with goods, fishermen casting their nets, and noblemen sailing on the Nile. Clay tablets from Mesopotamia feature cuneiform accounts of ship cargoes, crew lists, and river tolls. These images and texts remind us that ships were not peripheral, they were central. To record a boat on stone or papyrus was to record the essence of life itself: movement, exchange, survival. The Museum of the Waters. Some of the earliest ships still exist today, preserved by accident or by intent. The Pessa canoe, carefully housed in the Netherlands, is a silent witness to human ingenuity from nearly 10,000 years ago. The Khufu ship, painstakingly reconstructed in Egypt, stands as a monument to both spiritual belief and technical mastery. Other vessels are remembered only in fragments, broken timbers recovered from river mud, impressions left in ancient harbor clay, or faint carvings on temple walls. Yet each piece tells a story, carrying whispers from a time when the very concept of a ship was still miraculous. Influence on later. Naval traditions. The technical and cultural innovations of these early vessels directly influenced what came after. The lashings used to bind Egyptian planks together foreshadowed later joinery methods in Mediterranean shipbuilding. The reed boats of Mesopotamia, light and maneuverable, inspired later traditions of lightweight craft throughout the Middle East. The double-hulled canoes of the Pacific proved so effective that their basic design is still used in modern catamarans. Every ship that sails today, whether a nuclear-powered submarine, a cargo vessel the size of a skyscraper, or a racing yacht, owes its ancestry to those first fragile craft of wood, reed, and rope. The lineage is unbroken, stretching across 10 millennia of human endeavor. Conclusion: the first bridges between worlds. The story of the oldest ships in human history is not simply a tale of tools or technology. It is the story of humanity itself, of our desire to reach beyond what is known, to connect with others, to survive, to explore, and to dream. Ships were the first great bridges between worlds. They carried people across rivers, then across seas, and eventually across oceans. They allowed civilizations to flourish, ideas to spread, and cultures to meet. Without them, the course of history would have been unimaginably different. From the Pessa canoe carved in a pine log, to the reed boats of the Nile, to the mighty cedar barks of Egyptian kings, the earliest ships embodied both fragility and strength. They were fragile in their materials, reed, rope, wood, but strong in what they represented: courage, connection, and the relentless human will to move forward. Even today, when towering steel hulls glide silently across oceans, we carry with us the spirit of those first boat builders. Their legacy is written not only in artifacts and myths, but in every voyage humanity undertakes, whether across the sea, into the sky, or into the vast unknown of space. For just as the ship once carried us across the waters, so too do we continue to seek vessels to carry us into tomorrow. And so the tale of the oldest ships is not merely the tale of logs and reeds bound together. It is the tale of humanity learning to master the element that once seemed impossible to tame. It is a story of survival, of discovery, and of wonder. One that, like the rivers and seas themselves, will flow endlessly through time.